It was nearly 4 years ago when I embarked on a road trip across the country. As a frequent traveler and adventurer, I relished the thrill of exploring long, winding roads and discovering incredible hiking and camping spots. At the time, I had already been on the road for over a month, and I decided to take a short break in a small, unassuming town in Nevada. One evening, while sitting at a bar and chatting with the locals, someone asked me if I was visiting to see the mines. Curious, I inquired further. They spoke of countless abandoned mines and deserted mining towns scattered across the state. The way they described it, these remnants of the past held a mysterious allure, teeming with eerie history. That night, back in my camper, I researched these mines. Fascinated by what I found, I decided to alter my plans. I couldn't resist the allure of these desolate places. The next morning, with my curiosity piqued, I set out for one of the abandoned mining towns nearby. The hike up to the town was only about an hour and a half, but steep and grueling. When I finally arrived, the sight was surreal. A flat expanse on a large hill, dotted with around 20 to 30 weathered wooden buildings. In the center of the town, a rusty railroad track stretched ominously into the hill, disappearing into the dark maw of a mine entrance. I strolled along the tracks, taking in the haunting stillness of the town. The wooden structures were derelict, most filled with dirt and rubble. Though intriguing, they were secondary to my main interest, the mine itself. At the entrance, I pulled out my flashlight. As the beam cut through the darkness, I saw no end to the tunnel ahead. With a deep breath, I stepped inside. The air grew colder and heavier with each step. The deeper I went, the quieter it became, until the only sound was the echo of my footsteps reverberating through the mine. After a few minutes, I reached the end of the railroad tracks and encountered a weathered sign that read, "Area beyond this point closed." Ignoring the warning, I pressed on. The tunnel narrowed and sloped downward. At one point, the ground had partially collapsed, leaving a treacherous gap. A makeshift bridge had been constructed to cross it, but it looked perilously unstable. Shining my flashlight down, I saw that the drop was sheer and deep, certain death if I fell. Deciding it wasn't worth the risk, I turned back and explored one of the side passages I had noticed earlier. This passage led me to a steep vertical shaft with a rusty ladder descending into the depths. My flashlight revealed no bottom. Undeterred, I began my descent, but a loud, echoing thud from below froze me in place. The sound was impossible to pinpoint, close yet far. I directed my flashlight downward but saw only the ladder disappearing into the void. Eventually, I reached the bottom of the shaft and stepped into another tunnel. Just a few feet in, I found the source of the thud, a large rock lying in the middle of the passage. Its appearance was peculiar, as it clearly wasn't a natural part of the mine. My unease deepened. How had it fallen, and why now? As I pointed my flashlight further down the tunnel, my breath caught. Two figures stood in the shadows about 10 feet away, a man and a woman. Their features were gaunt, their clothes tattered. Something about their posture and the vacant way they stared at me chilled me to the bone. These weren't fellow explorers. They looked feral, as though they had been down there far too long. I instinctively began backing away, moving slowly to avoid startling them. My every nerve screamed to run, but I didn't dare turn my back. Reaching the ladder, I dreaded the moment I'd have to pocket my flashlight to climb. As I ascended, the silence behind me felt suffocating. But then I heard it, the metallic clang of someone grabbing the rungs below. Panic surged through me. I glanced down, but all I saw was darkness. Heart pounding, I scrambled up the ladder as fast as I could, my hands slipping on the cold metal. Once I reached the top, I sprinted out of the mine, through the ghost town, and back down the trail without looking back. When I reached my vehicle, I locked the doors and drove straight to the nearest police station. I recounted the encounter in vivid detail, emphasizing the malnourished and erratic appearance of the two individuals. Despite my concern, the police seemed indifferent. I never heard of any follow-up investigation. Since that day, I've done some digging online, piecing together possible explanations. There were reports of couples going missing in the area over the past decade, often linked to criminal activity. Could they have been fugitives, hiding in the mine to evade capture? I'll never know for certain, but one thing haunts me to this day: the look in their eyes. It wasn't just madness, it was the absence of humanity. And I was lucky to escape before I became their next victim. I live in the Midwest, a region where abandoned places are surprisingly common. In my last year of high school, my friends and I developed a habit of exploring these forgotten locations. It was a kind of rite of passage for teens in our area, equal parts thrill-seeking and bonding. This particular adventure took place on Memorial Day weekend. With 3 days off school and the end of the year approaching, we decided to check out a spot we'd been eyeing for months. The destination was a partially abandoned ghost town called Cairo. Though not entirely desolate, with a few remaining residents, most of the town was a decaying remnant of its past. Cairo had been established in the late 1800s, but had steadily declined over the decades due to flooding and racial tensions. The stories we'd heard about the place painted a picture of eerie stillness and crumbling history, a place where time had stopped. Intrigued by the tales and photos from other explorers, we were eager to experience it firsthand. On Sunday evening around 6 p.m., my friend Tristan pulled up to my house in his old sedan. Ryan was already in the passenger seat, and I climbed into the back, clutching my flashlight and a mix of excitement and nervousness. The drive south to Cairo took 2 hours, most of it through vast, empty farmlands and fields that stretched endlessly beneath a darkening sky. Few towns or cities interrupted the monotony of the drive, making the isolation all the more palpable. When we finally turned onto the road leading into Cairo, an eerie sensation settled over me. The faint glow of a few distant lights marked the homes of remaining residents, but everything between us and those lights was pitch black. The town was a husk of its former self, swallowed by darkness. We parked beside an old brick building with a faded sign that read liquor. Its windows were shattered, and vines had begun to claim its facade. As we stepped out of the car, the stillness of the night enveloped us. The only sound was the wind, which made the old wooden structures creak and groan like restless spirits. Ryan took the lead, and we began walking down the main road. On our left were small wooden houses, their frames consumed by creeping vines and overgrown bushes. On the right was a line of dilapidated shops, their once bright signs now faded and barely legible. The further we went, the more haunting the scene became. About halfway down the road, one building caught our attention. A brick structure with a weathered sign that simply said, "Gem." It was unmistakably an old theater, complete with a ticket booth near the entrance. We exchanged a glance, all silently agreeing that this was where we would begin our exploration. The front doors were boarded up, but we found a broken window and carefully climbed inside. The air inside the theater was thick and stale, carrying the unmistakable scent of rot and mildew. Our flashlights barely cut through the darkness, their weak beams illuminating only a few feet ahead. The main room was a decaying ruin. Dust and debris covered the floor, and the ceiling above was riddled with holes. As we stepped cautiously forward, Ryan suddenly froze and whispered for us to stop. His expression was tense as he listened intently. "What is it?" Tristan asked, but Ryan hushed him. After a moment of silence, Ryan whispered that he had heard a sound from above us. A single footstep, he claimed. Tristan and I hadn't heard anything, and we chalked it up to the building settling. Still, the tension in the air was thick, and we couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. We decided to move further inside and found a staircase leading to the second floor, where the theater seats were located. As we climbed the stairs, the creaking of the old wood beneath our feet echoed ominously. The second floor was a gallery of decay, with rows of seats arranged in a semicircle facing a stage below. We walked cautiously down the rows of seats, our flashlights sweeping over the ruined upholstery. Then, a sudden creak behind us made all three of us turn sharply. In the corner of the room, between a wall and one of the seats, stood a man. His disheveled appearance suggested he was homeless, but his presence was far from benign. His eyes, sunken and wild, locked onto us with an intensity that froze me in place. In his hand, he held a small revolver, its barrel pointed directly at me. The silence was deafening. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears. No one moved or spoke, the weight of the moment suffocating us. Then Tristan broke the spell. Without a word, he turned and bolted down the stairs, leaving Ryan and me frozen in terror. I forced myself to stay calm and spoke in a steady voice, telling the man we were leaving and didn't mean any harm. He didn't respond, didn't lower the gun, didn't even blink. Slowly, Ryan and I began backing away toward the stairs. The moment we were out of his sight, we turned and sprinted as fast as we could. My chest burned as I ran, my legs screaming in protest, but I didn't dare stop until we reached the car. We slammed the doors shut, and Tristan floored it, the tires kicking up gravel as we sped away. For the next hour, we drove in silence, each of us processing what had just happened. Looking back, I can't help but wonder about the man in the theater. Maybe he was someone who had lived in Cairo before its downfall, clinging to the ruins of a life that no longer existed. Or maybe he was just another casualty of the town's decay, lost to desperation and madness. Whatever the truth, I know we were lucky to escape that night. The encounter left a scar, a reminder that some places are abandoned for a reason. We haven't tested our luck since. There's an abandoned hotel in my town that's been vacant for decades. Over the years, it had been purchased multiple times, but every owner ended up going bankrupt after just a few years. Our town is small and old-fashioned, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else. There's little reason for outsiders to visit unless they have family here, and certainly no need for a hotel as large as this one. The building itself was enormous, at least 6 stories tall, making it the largest structure in town. It had a kind of ominous presence, towering over everything else, a skeleton of what might have once been grandeur. For as long as I could remember, people whispered stories about the place, rumors of strange sightings and inexplicable sounds, but I'd always dismissed them as just small-town folklore. When I was 23, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to check it out. I wasn't expecting anything dangerous or particularly scary. It was just an old, abandoned building. I figured it might be interesting to explore and maybe snap a few photos. To make it seem less ominous, I chose to go during the day. My logic was that if anyone else was there, they'd likely be harmless explorers like me. I parked my car at a store about half a mile away to avoid drawing attention, then walked to the hotel. It stood in isolation, surrounded by vacant lots where other buildings had long since been demolished. The closer I got, the worse it looked. The brick facade was crumbling, and vines crept up its walls like nature was trying to reclaim it. The windows were shattered, and parts of the roof had collapsed inward. The front lobby was eerily empty, save for a few scattered pieces of old furniture. A couple of overturned chairs, a rotting couch, and a desk covered in dust. The smell of mildew and decay hit me as soon as I stepped inside. A heavy silence hung in the air, broken only by the faint creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. I made my way to the staircase, opening the door with some effort. Inside, the stairwell was shrouded in shadows, with barely any light seeping in. A faint beam of sunlight came through a broken window several floors up, just enough to outline the steps ahead of me. I climbed cautiously, my footsteps echoing hollowly. When I reached the second floor, the door wouldn't budge. Something heavy was blocking it from the other side, and a sheet of wood had been nailed over the small window in the door. I moved on, ascending to the third floor. The door here opened with a groan, revealing a dimly lit hallway that immediately sent a chill down my spine. The corridor stretched out before me, narrow and oppressive, with only a single window at each end providing the faintest hint of light. The air was heavy and stale, carrying a faint metallic tang. Dust coated the floor and walls, and the silence was almost suffocating. I stepped into the first room with an open door, my flashlight illuminating the scene. Oddly, it looked almost untouched. Dust blanketed the furniture, but everything was still arranged as if the room had been frozen in time. The bed was neatly made, towels were folded on the dresser, and there were even small, unused bars of soap in the bathroom. The eerie normalcy of it all only heightened the tension. Then I heard it, a faint thump. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The sound had come from somewhere nearby, but I couldn't tell if it was from the floor I was on or the one below me. A moment later, slow, deliberate footsteps creaked on the floorboards, drawing closer. I stared at the doorway, praying the sounds weren't coming from my floor. The footsteps stopped, followed by the sharp sound of a door slamming shut below me. Then silence. I crept to the hallway, peering out cautiously. My flashlight barely pierced the darkness, revealing nothing but the empty corridor. But something about the stillness felt wrong. My mind raced with possibilities. Was someone else here? So why would they slam a door like that? The unease was overwhelming. I decided it was time to leave. Making my way back to the stairwell, I opened the door and began descending. The metal stairs echoed with each step, the sound far too loud for my liking. As I passed the door to the second floor, something caught my eye. A small gap in the doorway that hadn't been there before. I stopped, my breath hitching. Slowly, I looked down the staircase. A figure stood just a few steps below me, barely visible in the darkness. They didn't move, but their eyes locked onto mine, cold and emotionless. My blood ran cold. With no other option, I started descending again, moving as carefully as I could. My heart raced as I passed within arm's reach of the figure, their eyes following me with every step. I could feel their gaze burning into my back as I continued down, the tension almost unbearable. When I reached the bottom, I pushed the door open and bolted into the lobby. The sunlight streaming through the broken windows was a relief, but I didn't stop running until I was back at my car. I sat there for a long time, staring at the hotel in my rearview mirror and trying to process what had just happened. Looking back, it was one of the dumbest things I'd ever done. I have no idea who or what that person was, but leaving when I did might have been the only good decision I made that day.